once I'm into these vessels, it doesn't matter how I got there. But since you guys have slept since then, let's make sure that you remember. How do you get blood to the head? From the head, it comes common carotid, right? And then which vessel gives blood to the outside of the head? External carotid. And which vessel gives blood? 75% of the brain. Internal carotids, right? And the internal carotids go up through here, through the carotid canal. And then the rest of the blood supply to the brain comes from this guy right here, which is what? Vertebral. And the internal carotids and the vertebrals form a cerebral arterial circle, or the circle of Willis, right? And when I took anatomy, I had to know every damn one of those vessels, so you're welcome. Cerebral arterial circle, this one goes up the basilar artery between the pons, and it forms this little circle. By the way, I actually only have one vertebral artery because I apparently have weak, it's a genetic thing that I have a weak walls in my arteries, and when I got super duper stressed out, my husband and I almost got a divorce and my life was freaking falling apart. What happened is one of those vertebral arteries developed a fistula and just whoosh, blew and dumped directly into my vertebral vein without delivering blood supply to my brain. And I didn't die. I don't think I had a stroke, but maybe I'm too dumb to know now. I don't know. So maybe I was like 10 IQ points smarter and this is all I got left. Okay. But anyway, what happened, I was sitting on the couch and all of a sudden I could hear the blood whooshing through my skull. I could hear every single time my heart beat. I could hear it resonate with my skull, and it went, and it never stopped. And of course, my life was falling apart, so I didn't go to the doctor, right? I didn't go to the doctor until my life stopped falling apart, and then I went back and I went to my cardiologist, and he was like, hey, after he finished looking at my heart, I was like, hey, maybe you should listen to this, because like I've been hearing my heart, my blood rush through my skull for like a year and a half now. And he took the stethoscope and he put it up to my head and he said, oh shit. I don't think you're supposed to say that as a doctor, right? I said, oh shit. So apparently what happened is I busted a hole in that thing, but I didn't die because of collateral circulation, right? So when he figured it out, it's dumping directly from my right vertebral artery into my right vertebral vein without going through a capillary bed. And I was like, he's like, okay, so well, we need to fix this. I was like, why? Because I've gotten used to the noise. I mean, it's so loud. I had to sleep with a white noise maker, and I couldn't hear you if you were on the right side of my body. He's like, Melanie, what's going to happen if you dump arterial pressure blood into a vein for years? What's going to happen? You're going to bust the damn vein, aren't you? Right? And then you're going to bleed out. So they I have like $30,000 of platinum coils stuck in that vessel. They were going to try to open it up, but then they thought it would just send a clot to my brain. So instead of opening it up, they shut it down, right? So I don't think they have any resale value, so don't kill me. But anyway, and then I got to watch everything except for the very last moment. I got to watch the whole damn thing. They went up the femoral all the way up, all the way up. And I could see him right until he got close to my brain. He's like, you need to go sleep now. Okay. But he did videotape it for me, which was awesome. Okay, so I delivered all of the blood to the brain through the cerebral arterial circle, and now I'm going to get it back. It is going to come back through the sinuses. In lecture, I'm not going to test you on the individual sinuses because I think they're hard to see unless you have a 3D view. So you can learn the sinuses in lab. Notice that all of them will ultimately dump into the sigmoid sinus, which will then dump into the internal jugular vein that goes through the jugular foramen out of the skull, right? And then if we want to gather up the rest of it, we gather up the rest of it. Here's the internal jugular. Now follow the one from the outside of the head, and what would you call that one? External jugular. External jugular usually dumps into the subclavian. It really can dump anywhere it pleases. It can dump over here if it wants to. So you just follow it from where it goes. Usually dumps into the subclavian. And then what do you think this one's called? That's the vertebral, right? And then after you gather up all of the stuff from the head into the subclavian, right? All of it, then it becomes the brachiocephalic because it's got everything from the head and arm. Yeah? So with veins, they usually change names after a branch point, right? So it's not brachiocephalic until you have the whole brachio and the whole cephalic, right? And then you guys told me this before, but tell me again. The two brachiocephalics join to form what? superior vena cava. Good? Okay. All right. So now we did that. Now let's go to the arm, right? So the next thing that we need to do is we need to follow that subclavian out. Now, when is it called subclavian? Well, if it's near the clavicle, I promise you I'm asking about subclavian artery, right? It changes, actually, this one is actually changes names into axillary after it goes under the clavicle and over the first rib. But if it's in the armpit region, I'm asking about axillary, right? So I don't need to nitpick you and try to trick you. That's pointless. Okay, so let's go to the arm and do arterial supply to the arm. It's so easy, guys, it's so easy. So we are doing arterial supply to the arm. All arterial supply to both arms comes ultimately from the subclavian, right? Then when I'm in the armpit, I call it the what? And then when I'm at the arm, I call it the brachial. And then it's going to split usually about elbow level, right? And then it's going to split into a lateral one and a medial one. What are those? Radial and ulnar arteries. Good? Okay. Now, I don't usually test you on these, but I want to tell you that it's not like you don't get blood supply to your hand. You do. You have two arches. They're anastomoses. We've got a superficial one and a deep one, but it's not that superficial because would it be a good idea to keep arteries superficial? No. So it's superficial for an artery, right? So we've got a superficial arch and a deep arch, and then we've got arteries coming off of them called the digital arteries. Good? I don't usually have you label the arches down in the hand because it's really hard to see on a 2D picture which one's what. But just know that's how you get blood supply to your hands, okay? All right, so could that be easier? No, it couldn't be any easier, right? There's some other little vessels, but you don't usually get tested over those. Okay, so we got all the blood supply to the arm. Everybody good with blood supply to the arm? And now we're going to get it back. Back is a little harder, but just a little bit. It's a little harder because there are more veins than there are arteries. Some of the veins are superficial and some of the veins are deep, okay? So you had to do a trace in lab, and when your trace was superficial, right? And also, by the way, there's more variation, as I mentioned, in veins than in arteries. I don't nitpick you on venous variation because that is silly. I want you to understand blood flow patterns that are important. If there is an important variation like hepatic portal circulation that's meaningful, then I care about that one. But do I care whether you get it exactly like the textbook with this one? No, just follow what it says and realize that about 30% of the time you're going to run into variations when you actually look at a human, okay, especially with veins. Okay, so again, with the arches, I don't usually test you over them, but let me look at them so that you can see. Of course, you do get blood supply back from your hand, duh. And I don't know why they didn't label the digital veins, because obviously those are digital veins if those are digital arteries, right? And the digital veins are going to go up into two sets of arches. And the arches are weird, so don't expect me to ask you about them specifically. I've got this superficial one that's on this side, right? And then I've got two on the other side. These you can usually see because they're not called superficial, but they actually are, right? The ones that you can see on the back side of your hand. So those are called the dorsal ones. They're on the dorsal side of your hand. Okay, so let's just follow those because those are the superficial ones. They're not called superficial, but they are close to the surface. And if I follow those up, please note that I will end up in either the basilic or the cephalic vein. Does that make sense? Okay, there's other really superficial veins here, but the ones that are consistent from person to person are basilic and cephalic. So which one's which side? Basilic, boob side. Cephalic, other side. You're not going to forget now, are you? Right? Everybody's either got boobs or trying to figure out a way to get a boob. So, basilic, cephalic, right? And then the anastomosis between them, yeah? The anastomosis between them is pretty variable. The most common is median cubital. And the reason that one's important is because it's really, really, really superficial. It's a common site for blood draws, right? The median cubital. The wiremen in lab, however, have a variation. Instead of just a median cubital, you've got two different branches coming in. And that's fine too. That exists in a lot of people. Okay. Usually median cubital is the most common one. So after we gather all those up, what happens? We've got basilic and cephalic. Where do they dump? Well, they're veins, so they dump wherever the hell they want. Most of the time, what happens is they dump either into the brachial or the axillary. That's usually where they dump, okay? Nobody in their right mind could count it wrong if you dumped into the brachial or the axillary, because they really do dump either place. But now, after you have gathered them, please note that after you gather them, you're going to be axillary in the armpit, of course, right? And then no matter where they dumped, you are going to be what when you run in under the clavicle? Subclavian, and then follow it. So follow that superficial vein, superficial drainage back to the heart. We go into the subclavian. Then I have to gather what before I can become brachiocephalic? What do I have to gather before I can become brachiocephalic? I have to gather all the blood from the head, yes? And then I'm brachiocephalic. And then the two brachiocephalics join to form the superior vena cava. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So now let's do the deep drainage. And the deep drainage starts with digitals and arches as well. I don't test you on the digitals and the arches because it's impossible to tell which ones are where. But you've got digitals, and notice this darker one. This darker arch right here is actually called the superficial palmar venous arch. It's on the palm side. It's not as superficial because you've got thicker skin on the palms of your hands. If you follow that one up, what it will do is form two ulnar veins usually and two radial veins, okay? Some people have 1 and 2, some people have 2 and 2, some people have 1 and 1. Either way, they are relatively deep, and they're usually running with the radial artery and the ulnar artery, okay? And then as they pass the elbow, then they become usually two brachial veins, usually. Where do the brachial veins come together? Wherever they want. Sometimes they're right above the elbow, sometimes they go all the way up. Doesn't matter, okay? So those are brachial veins right there. And then the brachial veins are, of course, going to become in the armpit what? Axillary, subclavian, gather up the head, and then your brachiocephalic. Good? Okay. All right with that? Okay. Do you guys find vessel patterns, vessel flow difficult? It's not particularly difficult. It's not like, for instance, learning structure and function of the brain to me. It's not as difficult as even like spinal cord, you know, like getting stuff through the spinal cord. So hopefully it's logical to you. If it's not, then tell me and I'll go through it more slowly. Okay, so now here's where we are. We have done all of the blood supply from the ascending aorta, all of the blood supply from the aortic arch, right? Now we're going to start descending, and we're going to do descending thoracic first, and then descending abdominal. Good? Okay. Descending thoracic. Okay, so why does the descending thoracic not have very many branches? Because we already took care of almost everything in the thoracic cavity, didn't we? Like the heart got its blood supply from where? Ascending aorta, right? And the lungs got their blood supply from pulmonary circulation mostly, right? Okay. So what's in there that's left? Not a whole hell of a lot is left. So we just have these little vessels. And these little vessels are primarily the descending thoracic aorta gives rise to these intercostal arteries that go between the ribs. There's 3 different kinds of intercostal arteries, but you can't tell the difference on a 2D picture which one's where. So you can just call them intercostals and realize that there's anterior ones and posterior ones and some other, but I don't make you distinguish between them. So those are called intercostal arteries. Everybody okay with that? Okay. Then there are 2 other branches that are not shown on any picture in your textbook that I found, but are conceptually important, and they are branches off of the descending thoracic aorta. And they are, first one is we never supplied our esophagus, so we probably better do that, right? And that's probably where it would come from, right? The descending thoracic. So there's an esophageal artery. You don't have to label it, but know where it comes from, right? And then there is another one, I think somebody in this class asked about it last time. It might have been you, Cora, or was it you? Okay. So Naomi asked about blood supply to the lungs, the parts of the lungs that are not doing gas exchange from the alveoli, like the external parts of the lungs and the bronchioles that are supplying, the bronchi and bronchioles that are supplying them. Do they need systemic or pulmonary blood? Systemic. So there's a branch off of the, 2 branches actually paired, off of the descending thoracic aorta called the bronchial arteries, right? And they supply the parts of the lungs that don't get pulmonary blood supply. Good? And you don't have to label them on a picture. Just know conceptually that they come from there. Okay? All right. So that is all of the blood supply that you have to know that's coming from the descending thoracic aorta. And now we have to drain it. Everybody hates this drainage pattern. Let me explain to you why it's weird, and then we'll talk about how it's weird. Okay, so the venous drainage of the thoracic cavity is weird. And it's weird because remember that the aorta is more left, yes? That means that the vena cava are more right, right? And when you're doing venous drainage from the right side, you can go almost directly into the vena cava. But when you're doing venous drainage from the left side, you have to make a couple little jogs to get over there, right? Okay, so that's why there's this weird pattern here. It's asymmetrical, and most of the vessels are even called azygous. And azygous means unpaired, like not zygote, azygote, right? Not zygote, they're unpaired. These vessels are unpaired, okay? So ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to drain blood from the intercostal veins, right? That makes sense? All of them. You don't have to learn the specific intercostals. And ultimately they're all going to end up mostly in the superior vena cava. Every once in a while one drains into the inferior, but mostly in the superior vena cava. So here's the deal. Let's do the easy ones first. On the right side, the vena cava are closer to that side. So the right intercostal veins dump directly into this vessel, which is called the azygous vein, and then that one dumps into the superior vena cava. Is that okay? That big one right there? Okay. But on this side, you have to do something weird to get there. Okay, so we're over on the left side now. Okay, so these are intercostal veins, yeah? They're going to dump into one of two places. This one is called the accessory hemiazygous, which will go down and then dump into the azygous, which will go into the superior vena cava. The lower intercostal veins do it slightly differently. The lower intercostal veins will dump into the hemiazygous, which will dump into the azygous, which will dump into the superior vena cava. The only place that you can see this other than your textbook is on the Wireman model. Okay, the Wireman model you can follow. If this were my textbook, I would draw myself lines, right? An arrow to show me where it comes from, right? You would draw an arrow from, for instance, here, and then down, and then over, and then up, and then in. Yeah? Okay. That makes sense? Nobody likes that venous pattern, so it just exists. Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
So you talked about that like disorder where the internal bodies like flip.
Yeah.
So would the vena cava and the aorta be swapped?
They sure are. Yeah. I'm going to take anybody's doing the TA class next semester. I'm going to take you guys to the body donor program to show you that among other dissections because they have that on display at the body donor program, which is awesome. So I usually take the TAs in like January. We take them to the body donor program. We talk about how bodies are, how we get the donors, how they're preserved, all that kind of stuff. Go ahead.
So the accessory hemiazygous goes down and
down, over, up. Yeah.
And the
hemiazygous, up, up, in. Yeah? It's weird. I totally agree. Okay. Ready for the next one? Okay, so now we're going to do arterial blood flow through the abdomen. Ready? So now, of course, we are going to move down to the descending abdominal aorta, right? Okay. So the descending abdominal aorta has some big branches and some small branches. Let's take care of the easy stuff first. Ultimately, what we're going to have to do from the descending abdominal aorta is give blood supply to the entire digestive tract, right? And also the urogenital tract, ultimately, right? Okay. And then eventually our legs, we'll get those eventually, okay? So let's look at the easy branches. First off, there are three big honkin' branches, usually close to the middle, okay? We're going to talk about them in detail in just a second, but just let's learn them in order first. The first one immediately inferior to the diaphragm is called the Celiac Trunk, or sometimes Celiac Artery. Talk about that one in just a second. This is the superior mesenteric artery. Do you remember what mesentery is? Yeah, it's like, remember, it's 2 layers of serous membrane that is holding your intestines from the body wall. You have a superior mesentery that's holding on to mostly your small intestine. You have an inferior mesentery that's holding on to mostly your large intestine. And these arteries are running through the 2 layers, right, to the organ. Does that make sense? So this is superior mesenteric and this is inferior mesenteric. Okay, let's go back and pick up the other easy ones. Let's deliver blood supply to the adrenal glands. Those are called the suprarenal arteries. This one's weird because it usually goes out the diaphragm and back in, but it doesn't matter, right? It's still suprarenal artery going to the suprarenal adrenal glands. If you can't figure out what those are, you should probably flunk the class. What are those? What are those right there, right here? Renal arteries, yeah. It's like basically pointing right there, like renal arteries. I'm going to ask that, and if you miss it, I'm just going to go, oh, heavens. Okay, so that's the renal arteries, okay? And then these guys right here are called gonadal arteries unless you know the person's sex, and then they're not called gonadal arteries. If it is a woman, it is called a what? Ovarian artery. If it is a man, it is called testicular arteries. Yes, good? Okay, so there's just a general human, so these are called gonadals. Okay, now let's go back and pick up these big branches right here. This is the celiac trunk. Let's look at what it supplies. Remember, we talk about arteries as supplying and veins as draining. So the celiac trunk has 3 branches, even though textbooks for some reason describe it's got 2 branches and 1 continuation. That's dumb. Like, how do you know which one's a continuation? Potato, potato, they're all branches to me, okay? So the celiac trunk will branch to supply right over here. I bet you can figure out what that one's called based on where it's going. That is the splenic going to the spleen. Yes? Okay. This one is going around the lesser curvature of the stomach from the left side. So it's called the left gastric artery. Good? Okay. And then this other branch right here is going to branch a lot more. So this one is called the common hepatic artery because it's going toward the liver, but not just the liver. Common hepatic. Does that make sense? Okay. Now let's follow the common hepatic. Okay. Let's see what the common hepatic supplies. The common hepatic is going to branch and it's going to go to the greater curvature of the stomach. Do you see that? And also to the very first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. So this vessel right here is called the gastroduodenal artery. Good? Okay. This guy right here is going to form an anastomosis with that other one. It's going to go around the lesser curvature of the stomach, but this time from the right side. So it's called the right gastric artery. Good? Okay. And then you keep going to the liver. When you get here and you're just going to the liver, nothing else, everything else is already branched off, then you're either called the proper hepatic artery or the hepatic artery proper. Whatever order you get them in is fine, as long as you've got proper and hepatic. Is that good? Okay, so that's hepatic artery proper or proper hepatic. If you have a really good specimen, you can usually see it branch into left and right hepatic arteries after that. Good? So what have we given blood supply? Which organs have gotten blood supply from the celiac trunk? Spleen, stomach, liver, and a teeny bit of the small intestine. Yes? That's what the celiac trunk took care of. Good? Okay. Now, before we drain it, we're going to do the entire abdomen before we drain the blood supply. Okay, so this is celiac trunk, but now we've got a lot more in there we have to supply. Let's do the other 2 branches. The other 2 branches are this big honker right here. Most of what that one supplies has been cut off. Okay, this is the superior mesenteric artery. It's going to supply the entire rest of the small intestine, right? It actually branches off into these little guys, which are called intestinal arteries, but you don't have to know those by name. But it makes sense, right? Okay, so the superior mesenteric artery will branch and supply the entire rest of the small intestine and the proximal portions of the large intestine. Proximal portions of the large intestine would be ascending and transverse colon. Those are the first 2 parts, right? Does that make sense? Okay, and now all we have left to do as far as digestive tract is supply what we haven't supplied yet. The only parts that we haven't supplied in the digestive tract yet are what? Descending colon, sigmoid colon, right? That makes sense? The rectum is supplied by something different, okay? So basically now, this is the inferior mesenteric, and it's going to supply the rest, the descending and sigmoid colon. Good? Okay? Go ahead.
So I read this article about this kid who was born with 2 sets of kidneys. So that would mean he would need like twice as much blood supply to his kidneys. And there was like,
Ooh, that'd be really hard on your system because about 25% of your blood supply goes to your kidneys at any given time.
yeah, and it was just really interesting because there was like a big medical ethics debate to see if a kid should donate their kidneys. Like, how would you do that without
arteries are pretty good. I'm sure they could do it. What they probably have to do is cut off blood supply for long enough that his blood actually sort of rerouted, and then take the kidneys out. But you'd have to like keep them suffused enough not to kill them during the process. What did they do?
I don't remember. I read about it.
But I mean, it would really compromise your blood flow because your kidneys get a disproportionate amount of your blood flow. Between your brain and your kidneys alone, that's 45% of your blood flow. So I don't know how the hell he would stand up, right? How would you do anything, right? However, he could drink like a fish. He'd be like, I'm slamming tequila shots. He might need 2 livers for that, though. Okay, so that's superior and inferior mesenteric artery. Everybody good with that? Okay, now, venous drainage of the abdomen is where you need to pay attention because this really puts structure and function together. So venous drainage of the abdomen. So let's acknowledge the simple parts first. First off, with venous drainage of the abdomen, everything has to go into the inferior vena cava, ultimately, right? But some of it doesn't go there directly. Please note that you do not see an inferior mesenteric vein, a superior mesenteric vein, or a splenic vein dumping into the inferior vena cava, because that's not how it works. Some things dump directly, though. Renal veins, right? Easy, okay? Gonadal veins will dump pretty much wherever they want, but usually they'll either dump directly into the inferior vena cava or they'll dump into a renal, which will then dump into the inferior vena cava. Again, not particularly important which way they do it, okay? And then the suprarenal veins, right? The suprarenal veins, those either dump directly into the inferior vena cava or a renal first, right? Okay, everybody okay with that? So where are those intestinal ones? Where is that? Well, the reason that that whole flow pattern is different than you expect it to be is because of what we call hepatic portal circulation. And hepatic portal circulation says that when I eat food, yes, and I absorb both the nutrients and potentially toxins and pathogens from my food, right, because none of our food is stable, I absorb them into a bunch of different vessels, right? But that blood is potentially funky. It's also really rich in nutrients, but it's potentially funky. So instead of dumping it back into circulation directly into the inferior vena cava, I send it through the liver first, right? And so it goes through the liver from the bottom to the top, and the liver monitors. Remember, the liver has what kind of capillaries in it? Who remembers? Big sinusoid capillaries. So it goes really slowly through these big sinusoid capillaries. You got big macrophages on top of the sinusoid capillaries that are looking at everything funky, find some E. coli, whoop up on the E. coli before they dump it into circulation so you don't go septic. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is called hepatic portal circulation. I love hepatic portal circulation, FYI, okay? So we are going to learn hepatic portal circulation, not just the what, but also the why, okay? So do you see in hepatic portal circulation, do you see a chair? Can you see a chair? Yeah? Can you see a chair with a big liver pillow on the top of the chair? Yeah? Do you see it? Okay, so the chair goes front leg, seat, right? Back leg, back of the chair, big liver pillow. Got it? Do you see it? It is also drawn right here for you, if you're not one of those people who has tremendous imaging capacity. Good? Okay. What? Really? Okay. So now do you see the chair? Now do you see it? Okay, you got your chair. All right. So what we are going to do is we're going to understand hepatic portal circulation by looking at this chair. Okay, you ready? We're going to label all the vessels and figure out which direction blood is going through them. Okay? This guy right here. Follow where it comes from and tell me what its name is. That is the splenic vein. Which direction is blood flowing through the splenic vein? Which direction? Yes, that direction. Good? Okay? All right. Now this one, don't try to memorize it. Just tell me, what do you think you would call a vein that is draining the distal end of the colon? I'd call it the inferior mesenteric vein. Yes? Which direction is blood flowing through it? Up. Yes? Got it? Okay. This one isn't showing you very well, so I'll tell you. This one is draining almost the entire small intestine plus the proximal portion of the large intestine. What would you call it? Yeah, that's the superior mesenteric vein. Which direction is blood going through it? Up. Okay, gather all three of those together plus some other little ones that I don't make you learn. This vessel right here is called the hepatic portal vein. Why portal? What does a portal vein do? Portal veins break the rules of circulation. Here is what circulation usually does. Circulation usually goes heart, arteries, arterioles, capillary bed, venules, vein, heart. Isn't that the normal pattern? Here's what a portal vein does. A portal vein goes heart, arteries, arterioles, capillary bed, portal vein, second capillary bed, putting two capillary beds in series, then venules, veins, heart. So if you collectively count all of these capillary beds as one, what they are going to do is take everything that comes from these capillary beds and send it through this capillary bed with the sinusoid capillaries in it before it goes back into circulation. Does that make sense? So which direction is blood going through the hepatic portal vein? Up, yes. So blood is delivered to the liver from the bottom. You look confused. You have a question? Not ready to say it?
Just my face.
Processing. Okay. Go ahead.
So would the liver suck all the nutrients out of the blood?
We'll talk about that in just a second. It's a great question. Hold on to it for just a second. I'm almost ready for it. Okay. So all of that blood that is coming in is ultimately going to leave the top of the liver, yes, through two vessels that are called what? Yeah, these are what? Hepatic veins, left and right. Hepatic veins, not portal veins, right? And the hepatic veins are going to dump into what? Inferior vena cava. Okay. All right. So let me address one more thing and then I'll address Cora's question. Okay, so do you understand why this blood and this blood needs to go through the liver? Absorbed from the small and large intestines needs to go through the liver. Everybody got that? Because it could be funky. What about this blood? Does anybody know what the spleen does? Because usually people do not know what the spleen does. It's fine if you don't, because hardly anybody does. Anybody knows? Like, nobody ever talks about the poor spleen. You're like, what? Go ahead. Yes, it does. Oh my goodness, you're my favorite today. Plays a role in the immune system. Okay, specifically, it has a whole bunch of white blood cells in it. It can make a whole bunch of antibodies and white blood cells. So here's the deal. You are gathering in potentially funky foreign invaders, yes? Ready? They're going into there. This, you send in troops. Yes? And then they battle it out in the sinusoid capillaries. Yeah? Okay, go ahead.
So for someone that's immunocompromised, does that system have problems?
Immunocompromised is usually about more than the spleen. Our immune system is really redundant. Usually we can live without a spleen as long as we're adults, because your immune system is already fully formed. But that is one of the ways that children can become immunocompromised. So your spleen is really about your immune system, but it's even more about the development of your immune system. There are a bunch of different ways. But we're going to do lymphatic system next, so that question will come back up. Go ahead.
So I had a patient last night that had portal vein thrombosis.
Ooh! He had
How
a
would
clot
that
in this
play?
portal vein.
That's what it is.
Yeah. How the hell did they get a clot in there? Huh. What was somebody else's question? Go ahead.
So there are sinusoid capillaries in the liver?
Yes. Okay, so now we got one other weird thing to talk about the liver. Now I don't know if you realize, but I just told you that the liver gets two different kinds of blood because it gets systemic arterial blood from the hepatic artery proper, and now I'm telling you it also gets systemic venous blood from the hepatic portal vein, and that all dumps into the same capillary bed. So the blood in the hepatic sinusoids is really weird, right? So the liver is both getting blood, getting oxygen and nutrients, and also getting toxins from that blood. So the liver is doing both, and they get dumped into a common capillary bed, and it slowly percolates through, and then the blood that comes out the other side is different. Okay, so now let's address Cora's question, but I'm actually going to have you guys think about this at home. For the person who would really like an A on the 4th test and or be able to do the bonus really well, this is the question that I really want you to think about, and I ain't going to tell you the answers, damn it. So what I want you to do is I want you to compare 3 different vessels in 3 different ways. I want you to compare oxygen content in the hepatic artery proper, the hepatic portal vein, and the hepatic vein. I want you to compare potential pathogen concentration, right? Hepatic artery proper, hepatic portal vein, and hepatic vein. And then to address Cora's question, what about nutrients? Where would nutrients be high, medium, or low? That's all I need in any of those situations. High, medium, or low. Because that will force you to think through what the hepatic portal system is doing and what the liver is doing for you. Cool? Okay. And I'm going to say it again. I love the hepatic portal system. I love it. Go ahead.
So alcohol in large amounts is not good for your liver. What about alcohol makes your liver?
There is an enzyme that's made by your liver called alcohol dehydrogenase. If you overwhelm your liver with more alcohol than alcohol dehydrogenase can break down, then it becomes toxic. And it actually starts killing off the organ that is generally going to detoxify alcohol, right? And there is a genetic predisposition to your level of alcohol dehydrogenase as well. Some people are really super duper susceptible to alcohol poisoning because they don't make very much alcohol dehydrogenase. That's genetics. It's just basically genetics. So if you know people who like can get super duper sick from 2 glasses of wine, a lot of times it's their alcohol dehydrogenase. Go ahead.
Why do you get jaundice if you have liver problems?
Because am I going to address that again? Okay, I'm not. So that's a phys question, but I'll do it a little bit. Okay. One of the other things that your liver does for you is breaks down old red blood cells when they get worn out. And the byproducts of old red blood cells are in your bile, your bilirubin. That's why it's that green, nasty color. Okay? And a healthy liver will clear all of that out of your bloodstream, and an unhealthy liver will not be able to, so it will start to build up in your bloodstream and then in your skin, and you'll get jaundice. Right? So the liver is supposed to clear those pigments that are the byproduct of breaking down red blood cells. Okay. All right. So now let's do arterial supply to the pelvis and lower limbs, which is super duper easy. Okay. You ready? So when you get to the distal end of the descending abdominal aorta, you go left and right common iliac arteries. Right and left common iliac arteries. And they're common because they're going to split, right? So the internal iliacs are right here, okay? What did the internals supply? Most of your pelvic cavity and your internal genitalia, not your external genitalia. For instance, the penis is supplied from the external iliac artery, not the internal. So the internal iliac is going to supply urinary bladder, uterus, vagina, vas deferens, all of your internal ductwork and your internal reproductive tract. Does that make sense? Okay, the external iliac arteries supply the external genitalia, meaning it would supply the penis, it would supply the labia majora, right? But not the vagina, which is internal. Good? And then, of course, it supplies your lower extremities. And this could not be any freaking easier. I don't even know. The leg is so damn easy. Okay, let's do the leg. Blood supply to the leg. External iliac, okay? After it is in the thigh, it is called the femoral. Yes? Runs behind the knee. Somebody taught you that word. Popliteal. Remember how annoyed you were before? And now you're like, thank you so much for all those damn words you made me learn. That's the popliteal artery. And then it goes 2 big branches. First one stays posterior, called the posterior tibial artery. Branch off of that goes anterior tibial, right? And then there's another little branch right here that goes lateral, and that's the fibular artery. Does that make sense? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Does the fibular come off the anterior?
No, the fibula comes off the posterior. That make sense? Okay, so popliteal, posterior, branch off of that to fibular, right? Popliteal, this is actually considered a branch off of the popliteal that goes to the anterior tibial. I mean, it can branch wherever it wants to, but it usually branches behind the knee. Good? Okay, now, I don't make you learn these, but please note that the blood supply to the foot is very similar to the blood supply to the hand, right? Goes down and forms anastomoses and then digitals. Yes? Okay, same kind of pattern that you've got there. That couldn't be much easier, right? You got one on the anterior side of the tibia, call it anterior tibial. You got one on the posterior side, call it posterior tibial. You got one that's running lateral, call it fibular. Good? Okay, and then blood supply back from there. It's almost as easy, just a couple of little differences. I don't even think I put one of them in your notes because it's hard to ask on a 2D image, but it's in your lab, so we'll talk about that one too. Okay, so the only thing that's difficult about the leg is, of course, you have superficial and deep vessels, right? Please note that even though I won't ask you about these arches and the digitals, that they exist down there, right? Please note that the ones on the top of your foot are very, very superficial. That's why you can see all those veins on the top of your foot, right? And then those will go up and form, do you see this big guy right here? This is called the great saphenous vein. This is the longest vein in the body. Some textbooks call it the greater saphenous vein. I don't know, they liked it slightly more, right? That's the great saphenous vein. It's going to dump somewhere up here, usually into the femoral or sometimes right up here past the groin, right? So it's going to dump right up here. That's the great saphenous vein. And then this little guy back here, which I don't think we even have dissected out on any of the cadavers, but this one that's running posterior right here, do you see this guy right here? This is called the small saphenous vein. It usually dumps behind the knee, okay? So just those two. That's the only superficial ones you need to know. One of them I didn't even put in your notes, but it's in your lab, I think. Okay, and then as far as the deep ones are pretty easy too. Do you see these guys right here? Usually you've got two anterior tibial that dump behind the knee into the popliteal, yeah? And usually you have two posterior tibial that dump behind the knee, yeah? And usually two fibular, right? So they run right with the arteries. And then I'll get you in just a second, and then follow all of those up. And they are all going to collectively dump into the femoral. And then once the femoral passes the groin, it becomes what? The external iliac vein. Yeah? External iliac vein? Yeah? That makes sense? Okay. And then it gathers with the internal iliac to form what? Common iliac. And the two commons join together to form what? The inferior vena cava. That's how it's formed. Go ahead, Court.
Did the circumflex veins and arteries supply blood to the inside of the bone?
The circumflex veins and arteries. No, actually, I don't. That's these guys right here. Do you see those that are going into the bone? I don't remember what the circumflex do. I can totally look it up, but I forgot. I haven't taught those in a long time. That's a good question. Okay, so we did arterial supply and venous drainage. Everybody good? Okay. Before we go any further, actually we won't get to do much more, and I'll talk about fetal circulation in just a second. One thing that I didn't address, but I want to see if you can address. Can anybody tell me why we don't have any valves in the hepatic portal system? Because I kind of told you guys, but I don't know if you can pull it back up and put it together. There are no valves in hepatic portal circulation, even though most of the blood flow is backwards. And the vessels are really wide, so it's going to be super low pressure. So any idea why you don't have valves in hepatic portal circulation? There's something that happens that makes you not need them. Go ahead.
Is it breathing?
Yes, the respiratory pump. Remember, the respiratory pump increases pressure down there and decreases pressure up here with every time you breathe. So it's called the respiratory pump. So even though you've got super big vessels, super low pressure, you have a means of generating pressure every single time you breathe. So you don't need any valves there. Good? Okay, so let me just give you a preview of things to come. We won't get into it in detail today. We will finish this next time. Next time we're going to do my other favorite, circulation. Basically, I really like hepatic portal circulation. I really like fetal, and I really like renal, which we'll do when we do urinary system. Okay, fetal circulation is what we're going to talk about next. Let me just tell you the big picture with fetal circulation, not the details. The big picture with fetal circulation is that the fetus is being supplied oxygen not from the fetus's lungs, yes, but from the mother's blood supply. The fetus is being supplied nutrients not from the fetus's digestive tract, but from the mother's blood supply. So here's the question here. The fetus, does the fetus actually need different systemic and pulmonary blood? No. So what happens is you have a lot of crossover in the fetus between what would normally be separate systemic and pulmonary blood, right? And then in addition, they do all of the gas and nutrient exchange originally from this big structure. I got them in lab too. I'll have to make sure that they pull them out. This big disc-shaped structure that's stuck to the wall of the uterus called the placenta. So that's where all of the initial gas and nutrient exchanges occurs in the placenta, and it goes into the fetus, and then the fetus circulates everything around, and then it circulates it back to the placenta. So it's a weird blood flow pattern that's really kind of interesting. And obviously it works because we're here.